Texas-born Bernard L. Kowalski, you could say, was made for the movies and television. His father, Frank Kowalski, was a script supervisor at Warner Brothers in the 1930s and had worked with Michael Curtiz and Raoul Walsh. And in fact, he was the script clerk on Angels with Dirty Faces and got his son extra work as a kid in Virginia City and Dodge City, both directed by Curtiz and starring Errol Flynn. Bernie Kowalski came out of the world of one-hour episodic television. This is the 1950s, the late 50s. And it's important to look at the careers of someone like this versus what was going on with the talent pool in New York. It was harder in Los Angeles to really break free and make a name for yourself in one-hour episodic or half-hour episodic television that was made at the studios. They weren't the anointed princes, if you will. And so they were grinding through this work at studios, and to do quality work and be noticed and continue on was a bit harder because the sea of talent or sea of mediocrity or whatever, however you want to put it, was greater here in Los Angeles than it was in New York. Very early on, he had started working as an assistant director and also as a script clerk like his father. And he worked on things like Dragnet, but his big break came when he worked on the TV show Medic, starring Richard Boone, because the primary contributing director to the show was Robert Aldrich. And Medic was a substantial hit. And suddenly Bernie was now associated with a quality show. He was a young guy, and they were giving him his chances to direct pilots. Because of Bernie Kowalski's age, he was young, and he was now having this success by directing pilots that were being sold to the network. Gene Corman took notice of him, also because he had a reputation for bringing everything in on budget and not just being efficient, but being artistically efficient as well. The first feature film that Bernie Kowalski directed was Hot Car Girl, and it was for the Cormans, and it was a real quickie starring Dick Balcallion, but it had some nice action sequences and some chase material and really well-staged things with the cars, which would kind of become a little bit of a Bernie Kowalski trademark all the way, particularly later on when he's directing things like the Rockford Files and detective shows. Did a very good job, and the Cormans then brought him over to do Night of the Blood Beast. Kowalski's own memories of Night of the Blood Beast are marked by one fantastic thing. That was, he felt this great sense of collaboration with the Cormans, but also cooperation from everyone. Nobody was a stick in the mud. Everybody was trying their very best to make this silly movie as good as it possibly could be. And Kowalski so completely appreciated that. And he felt that the Cormans were in fact a model of what low-budget producers should be. And he also thought, it would be great if this attitude and this participation in this material would carry over into the network television.
Why does it have to be killed? Why are we always so quick to destroy? It's an alien. It's the first of its kind to come to the Earth.
John, you know what it's done to you, breeding its young in your body. You saw what it did to Dr. Wyman. Isn't that reason enough? It has to be killed.
You don't understand. It didn't come in malice. It could have killed all of you earlier, but it was me it was after.
Bernie Kowalski was a journeyman, absolutely, but he was a journeyman who was being known for doing quality work, and for someone, if he came in to direct a pilot, chances are the network would love the pilot and it would be sold. But he wanted to direct features, so the Cormans offered him another movie, and specifically Gene wanted to work with him again, and the result was Attack of the Giant Leeches, written by Leo Gordon, and starring Yvette Vickers and Bruno Vasoda and just a whole plethora of great character actors. Bernie Kowalski loved making this movie. And one of the reasons he loved making the film was, again, what he felt was this energy that he got from the Cormans. And Gene Corman was, in fact, producing the picture on set. And he remembered one day that they were having a problem because Yvette Vickers and Bruno Vasoda was a very large man, and everybody had to be in rafts floating around in the water. And they were kind of not moving in the right direction or the way that would look best for camera. So Bernie said, listen, we need some guys out there, we'll hide them, to kind of direct the rafts so that they pass by the camera lens the correct way and we can get the shots that we want. And Gene Corman said, well, to get these divers, I've got a solution. So he takes off his clothes, jumps in the water and grabs the raft, and he does it himself while Bernie is there rolling film, and the producer is up to his chin in water, making sure that the rafts go by the camera lens in the correct way. Also, he wanted to be sure to shoot those billowing plastic bags for the leeches, at least in a way that kind of hid their flaws, but still made them icky, if you will, and disgusting, which he thought was the main point of having a giant leech. He was very fond of Yvette Vickers. He said everybody was very impressed with the fact that she had been a Playboy playmate, but that she was so cooperative and would just do anything. If it was like an almost stunt or whatever it was, she was totally game for it. And as she got older and work became a little more spare for her, Bernie Kowalski made sure that he hired her and put her in things like Beretta and tried to give her as much work as he could because he liked her, and he was just so impressed with her back there in the 50s, floating around on that raft waiting to be sucked underwater by the giant leeches.
It should go any minute.
After Attack of the Giant Leeches, Bernie entered into a very productive phase of his career and also really had set his roots into Westerns. He had directed Westerns already, random episodes of things, and he started in on a series called Boots and Saddles, which was a very unusual cavalry series in that it dealt very often with Native American issues and their treatment at the hands of the United States Army, which was kind of going to be a little bit of a touchy subject for a lot of people because it didn't always show the cavalry in the best light. Bernie had already directed episodes of Broken Arrow, so he was very much in sync with this kind of material, and he was very good with it and very good with staging scenes with animals. Charles Marquis Warren was getting ready to leave the series Rawhide, and they thought Bernie Kowalski would be a great producer for the show. So Bernie Kowalski was brought over to Rawhide for one season, and it went very, very well. He got along very well with Eastwood, even his sometimes temperamental star, Eric Fleming, and it was all going very, very well until one day Bernie Kowalski gets called into William Paley's office at CBS. This is not good. Whenever the head of the network wanted to see you, no, you didn't jump for joy. And so he goes in and he sees Paley, and they sit down, and he says, well, I saw the latest Rawhide, and it looked great, and all this compliments, and then, but I have a problem. And Kowalski was, well, what's the problem? He goes, I paid a fortune to herd cows and keep those cattle in pens and pay wranglers and feed and everything else, and I don't see one damn cow in that episode. He was really angry. Poor Bernie Kowalski was like, the episode didn't really call for any cattle, and Paley reminded him the show was called Rawhide. It was about a cattle drive, and he fired him. So suddenly Bernie Kowalski is out of work, but he gets a phone call from an executive at Desilu named Herbert Solo. And Herb Solow says, listen, Bernie, I need to speak to you. I've got a project that Bruce Geller has created and wants to produce, but I can't get along with this man at all. And we're not being given a great deal of money to shoot the pilot, although it's kind of complicated. And I have another show that I just sold also for Desilu, and that's going to be a trial because it also needs a great deal of money that we don't have. So would you come in on the Bruce Geller show and make sure that the pilot gets made and that things go as well as they're supposed to go? And you'll also be directing some episodes of the show, but we can't really make you an on-screen producer, but I will give you a portion of the series. And Bernie Kowalski said, sure. He was off of Rawhide. He went in, he read the script, and it was elaborate and it was complicated, but he made sure that the pilot went swimmingly well for the money that they had, and the show was Mission Impossible. And he ended up with a gigantic chunk of Mission Impossible. And Bernie Kowalski was the silent man behind the scenes for the show's run. After the remarkable launch of Mission Impossible, Bernie Kowalski was in demand again for feature films, but on a much higher level. And Philip Jordan in the Cinerama organization had a property called Krakatoa east of Java, although it is in fact west of Java. It was originally a project that was going to be done at Columbia, but development of the script and what have you had taken a long time. And Jordan, who was producing it and had co-written the script, knew that the special effects required for the film would be absolutely enormous because you've got volcanoes erupting and ships sinking and all kinds of stuff, and it's a period piece. So they did something unusual. They contracted for the special effects before anything else and started building miniatures and building the effect sequences in giant tanks before 1 foot of film had been shot. So rather than shoot the movie and put the effects in where they would work, instead they did the exact opposite. And the director of those sequences was Eugene Lurie, who had directed The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and Gorgo. So Bernie Kowalski comes in, he sees this effects footage, and he knows, all right, I know how to frame all of the story around these sequences. And he had a very good cast with Maximilian Schell and Brian Keith and Diane Baker. Now, it was shot in Super 70 millimeter for Cinerama and opened at the Cinerama Dome. The movie has an odd feel to it because originally it was going to be this giant spectacle, but it was going to be very much G-rated, if you will. That approach kind of got tossed aside when they added all these adult elements to the movie. So Cinerama okayed the shooting of those scenes, and the whole thing was put together, and it felt a little, if you will, inconsistent, but the film did well.
I could drop you right here, you know? That box is up 2 days ago. You want your damn time up, huh? Don't scare you none at all, does it?
That's what Bernie was doing while his dad was with Sam Peckinpah, and they would form a very close working bond, and his dad was working on The Ballad of Cable Hogue. Both Kowalskis were doing just fine, and Bernie stayed with the feature films. The next movie he directed was a Western starring David Janssen and Gene Seberg and David Carradine called Macho Callahan. Bernie had collaborated, of course, closely with Peckinpah and had all of his experience on The Rebel and The Rifleman and going way back to the early 50s. And he had always leaned towards, if you will, the adult Westerns, the tougher Westerns, something realistic and not shy at all about violence. Macho Callahan is a really remarkable movie in that sense. It is incredibly brutal, and its themes of loyalty and what have you, this is post-Civil War, And David Jansen plays a fellow who escapes from a prison camp and goes after the officer he feels responsible for imprisoning him, in this case, David Carradine. He kills Carradine, and Carradine's wife, Jean Seberg, comes after Macho with a whole group of bounty hunters, including Bo Hopkins, and they catch up with him, and Macho Callahan gets her and rapes her, and she decides to stay with him. Well, you couldn't do that now, that's for sure. The Wild Bunch had opened a door to violence in Western movies, even more so than, say, certain really bloody horror films had for their genre. It was accepted, and the walls just kept getting pushed further and further and further apart as to what would be acceptable, and Westerns were getting bloodier and bloodier and bloodier, especially movies like The Deadly Trackers and The Hunting Party. So Macho Callahan fit into that movement and was one of the better movies, but it still had this very questionable kind of storyline. It was very adult, but it just presented it. It didn't preach about how we should feel about these characters. So that was yet another bold choice. But a Western starring David Jansen, the movie, it's an interesting movie and probably better than it should have been. And if it is better than the material, it's because of what Bernie Kowalski did with it. Interestingly, at this same time, Bernie's father, Frank, was involved in a very violent Euro-Western starring James Garner called A Man Called Sledge, which Garner maintained in his autobiography that it was the worst movie he had ever appeared in. It shows that the Kowalskis were definitely heading out west, which was probably one of the reasons that when Joseph E. Levine and Harold Robbins offered Bernie the chance to direct Stiletto, he took it. Stiletto is from a Harold Robbins novel, and interestingly, the screenplay was worked on anonymously by the great W.R. Burnett, who wrote Little Caesar and later in his screenwriting career, The Great Escape. And it stars Alex Cord when they were trying to turn him into a movie star post the Stagecoach remake, The Family, the mafia picture that he did with Kirk Douglas right before The Godfather. And this was a slick playboy gambler, master of casinos, who in fact is a hitman.
It's cold, and listen for the hissing.
Black Noon brought Bernie Kowalski back into the world of horror, and he was having a conversation with the makeup man, Dan Strepek, who had an idea for a movie. And he said, if we can do this, then John Chambers and myself will do the special effects makeup for the film. What are you calling it? And it was called S. And Kowalski loved it. He thought, this is a great idea. If you guys can pull off these snake effects, then let's do it. Richard Zanuck and David Brown had just made a deal at Universal after they had been kicked out of 20th Century Fox. And they were both senior executives, and Richard Zanuck's father, Darryl Zanuck, was the one who saw that they were given the boot. So suddenly they're at Universal, two anointed princes of Hollywood with no movies and no money. So they decided to do two movies. They decided, first of all, to do a picture called Willie Dynamite, a real tough little exploitation picture. And there was an open spot. They needed another movie. And so Bernie pitched S to them. And they said, great. The film was made at Universal on a very strict budget. And it remained one of Kowalski's very favorite projects for one great reason. Not only just the great effects makeup with leading man Dirk Benedict turning into a giant snake, and a very, very nice performance by young Heather Menzies, but Strother Martin as the mad scientist. And Kowalski had worked with him going back decades, and he just loved Strother Martin. Just thought he was so inventive and such a total presence that to have him there with hypodermic needles and this won't hurt a bit. And then he gives an injection, and the next thing you know, you're turning a young man into a giant cobra. Kowalski just thought that was absolutely fantastic. And of course, with the title and the great ad line, "Don't say it, hiss it," the film did very, very well. And Universal paired it on a double feature. It's probably one of the truly last major studio double features that ever was released. Certainly his first run, and that was in a movie called The Boy Who Cried Werewolf, which was the last film directed by Nathan Duran, who directed The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. And it went out as a double feature and absolutely cleaned up. And this was great news for producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown, because they needed some credibility with Universal long before they were able to deliver Jaws.
King Cobra versus Mongoose, or is it man versus man?
Bernie Kowalski had now had a hit theatrical feature. So he's back in demand once again. It was kind of always the one more encore for him when he went back to television and went back to work with his old friend James Garner on the Rockford Files in a longer episode written by Stephen Cannell called The Case is Closed, with Sharon Gless and Joseph Cotton. It has a great deal of car material in it, and Garner's being chased by the FBI, and he's being chased by the mob and what have you. So there were a lot of car sequences and chase sequences that were quite good, and Kowalski did a wonderful job directing them. And some of them, that footage, in fact, was reused in later episodes. His father was continuing with Sam Peckinpah, although that friendship was about to be breached, but not until Frank Kowalski had written Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. That became such a notorious picture, but as kind of had a tendency to happen with Sam and the people who were closest to him, they got into a tremendous row, and Frank Kowalski stepped away from Sam, sending him a very famous note that said, "Sam, you have lost a pallbearer, which leaves you with none." So Bernie, like his dad, was used to dealing, if you will, with problem children. He had been directing Banachek for NBC on the Name of the Game at Universal because George Peppard. And he ended up doing 4 episodes of the show. And Peppard was not an easy guy to work with. Bernie managed to get good work out of him and keep things peaceful and decent. And because of that, there was a show that Stephen Cannell had developed from another program that had done okay, but they had lost their star. And that was called Toma. And it was kind of a Serpico-like cop show about a New Jersey plainclothes detective who sometimes used disguises in his police work. Tony Musante had starred in that show, and he had quit after the first year. Everybody agreed they liked the concept, they wanted the cop show, so it was retooled. Again, Cannell came in, he realigned all the elements and wrote a new pilot to star Robert Blake. And Bernie Kowalski and Cannell worked together, and Beretta was born. And the show was a huge hit, and with a theme song that was a hit on the charts. Robert Blake was doing some of the very best work of his career, and Kowalski and he could collaborate and do very, very fine work. And in fact, the show itself was nominated overall for more than 10 Emmy Awards, and Bernie Kowalski was nominated for 2. Years later, Robert Blake would complain about the show, saying, "Oh God, it was the worst time of my life," and all this other, although he's making more money than he had ever made. And he was being seen in a public forum in an entirely different way than he had before, but he kept complaining and causing problems at Universal and what have you. And finally the show was pulled, but after 4 years. And for Kowalski, that was, he had done tremendous work on that show as both a producer and a director, and corralling those scripts and tailoring them for an actor who was very difficult to tailor material for. After Beretta, Bernie was called in on another show with another problem star, but it was kind of a different thing because his personality was decent. That was Airwolf. Jan Michael Vincent's drinking and things were starting to affect the show quite a bit, but Bernie ran it very, very well, and he was directing, but also brought in old friends that he could trust and could do well with Airwolf and handling Jan. The old friends had included Sutton Raleigh, it included Virgil Vogel, and so the show was getting made, and getting made efficiently and well, with a lot of second unit material because of all the action scenes with the helicopter, and that's very difficult to coordinate. Bernie Kowalski was the man who could do it. He left the show to go off and continue working with other producers and other studios just because he wanted to direct. And he missed directing and wasn't doing enough of it as he was running these shows. The thing was, he was running them so well and so successfully, those were the jobs he kept being offered, of course, being paid very, very well, and solving problems maybe that other producers couldn't solve. After Jake and the Fat Man, Bernie Kowalski went back again to freelance directing. He was just bouncing from show to show because he loved it. And I think that's how he wanted to go out, to leave the car chasing and all of that stuff behind him and go out with something gentle and nice, which is exactly what he did.